Have you ever walked into a situation where there's a heated discussion going on, and the first thing you do is get sucked right into that discussion and start taking sides and helping to be part of the gossip mongering, perhaps? Or have you ever been so convinced about what someone should do that you insist that they do it? Have you ever found that someone has insisted that you behave in a certain way, a way that maybe you prefer not to behave? Well, if you have, then A, welcome to the human race, and B, I'm glad you're here today, because that's some of the stuff that I'd like to talk about today. I'd like to share some ideas about how to navigate this place where there are times when we want the best for other people, even when they may not see it the same way. And there are times when other people want the best for us, and we may not see it the same way. And sometimes we want the best for a group of people, and we walk in and find ourselves almost powerless as we get sucked into their energetic vortex, if you will. Why is this such a challenge? And how can we navigate and remain who we are in the midst of it all? Well, that's what circles of connection are about. The challenge, of course, is that we are wanting and longing to be connected with other people. We are wired for connection. We're wired to want to be loved and to love other people. So on the one hand, we want to be connected with other people. And on the other hand, we want to be independent. We want to be able to have our own autonomy. And sometimes these two different warring, if you will, or it's almost like an elastic that's pulling us in different directions, where we want to be in connection, and at the same time, we want to be independent. So how do we navigate that? Well, imagine this as we dance between wanting to be connected, wanting to be independent, wanting to please, wanting them to like us, wanting to be connected, wanting to be independent. It can be at times a little challenging. And it's almost as if we have two hula hoops or two magician's rings. You know, those silver rings that you see with magicians that sometimes when you put them together, they look like one, and then you pull them apart and they're two magician's rings, and they look like they'll never come apart, but at some point they're always connected. Well, that's essentially what we want to go for. We want to go for the idea of one hula hoop or one magician ring being us, and the other hula hoop or magician ring being the other, another person, a group of people, an institution, a workplace, whatever it might be. And to the extent that we are able to remain connected and be separate, to be separate from, that is when we're in a place where we can be who we are and be in connection with other people. And there is actually a term for this. It is called self-differentiation. And essentially what it means is that we know where we begin and end. We know where others begin and end. And as much as possible, we remain connected with other people without eclipsing them or without allowing them to eclipse us by bringing those rings together so much that there are times when we forget who we are or they forget who they are. And this is one of the consequences and why self-differentiation is so important. Because what happens when we're in a place where we're forced to comply, to be part of one ring, is that at some point, somewhere in our longing, in our inner spirit, if you will, there's a part of us that screams to leave, that wants to get out. And sometimes that's what happens. So sometimes we find that people will force us to do something, or coerce us, maybe is a polite way to say it. And at some point, there's this resistance that we have. The same thing is true for us when we're the person who is trying to impose our ring on someone else, that they have that resistance to us. And so that's one consequence. And one of the reasons that it's important for self-differentiation to happen. The other is to think of that, the power of what I just said, in terms of how do you behave when someone doesn't do as you want? If you become easily offended, if you say, I'm out of here, if you cut people off and withdraw from them, these are all normal reactions to lack of differentiation, where we have these two circles that are trying to close in on each other. And so our goal is not to call them names. It is not to lose sleep over their behavior. It is not to cut off. Our goal is to stay connected and at the same time be as separate or as independent as we can be. And Diane actually mentioned it in her opening prayer this morning, where she talked about looking out for others and being responsible for ourselves. That is the very definition of what self-differentiation can look like. Why is it so important? Oh, well, one of the other reasons that this is important is the very first thing I said is walking into a room where there's anxiety and then getting sucked in. Well, if we are separate from the room of anxiety, then when we walk into that room, we can observe as if from a higher place. And when we do so, we become the voice of reason, or we have the ability to be the voice of reason. And so this is some of the promise, I guess, of self-differentiation. The first is to realize and remember that we are part of an interconnected whole. We talk about it every week. At Unity, it's Unity's first principle and second principle, that there is only one power and we are part of that. We're in it. We live, breathe, and have our being in this power and as this power. And that means that just like a spider web, when we walk into a room that is already down and we allow ourselves to drop to that place, we're adding to the weight, if you will, of that spider web. But if we come in with an upliftment, then we have the ability to actually be the presence of calm in that spider web, in that interconnected net. And when that happens, then we have the ability to think. And so if we're looking to fill the world with love, to be the presence of love, to be the presence of peace, then being separate and remembering what our values are is an important tool in our toolbox for helping to uplift everyone. And I call that emotional immunity. It means that no matter what's going on out there, we can be calm in here, and that calmness will spread. The other reason it's important to be aware of this tension between the two rings is that our goal is to create a place of emotional safety. And like it or not, that means that sometimes we need to allow other people to do things that we may not think are good for them. Because think about what it feels like when someone tells you what to do, or somebody tells you that they don't like what you're doing and that they don't think it's good for you. What's your first reaction? Out of here. Don't want to hear it. Don't talk to me. This conversation is over. Well, when we create a place where the conversation is over and we cut off, we've lost the connection and that opportunity to connect. And the only way that we encourage that is by creating a place in which it is safe for people to make mistakes, to be different, to think differently. And as one of my most admired teachers, Martha Creek, says, differences does not necessarily mean to differing. Let that land for a little bit. Differences need not lead to differing. And then the third reason, and that's is tied to what I mentioned before, like walking into this room of everybody going crazy because the sky is falling, is that when we can calm everything down, we function better. Our prefrontal cortex, that thinking part of our brain, is a relatively new evolutionary trait. And so when we are in a place where we are emotionally anxious or emotionally activated, that prefrontal cortex receives very little oxygen because everything then becomes wired for flight or fight. And our oxygen is removed from our thinking brain. And so we literally, when we say, oh my God, what was I thinking? The answer is you weren't. And that is just a physiological truth. And so there are reasons for us to want to do this, to be as independent and connected to our own values as we can be, and at the same time, be connected and not cut off from the people that we care about. So how do we do that? I'm going to give you 3 A's and a D today. The first is to attend to your own anxiety. And by that, what I mean is notice your tendency to engage, to get sucked in, to, as Pema Chodron says, to bite the hook. And refuse to escalate. That's why there's a picture of an escalator on here. Refuse to escalate. The author of the book, The Gift of Fear, Gavin de Becker, says, watch and wait is better than engage and enrage. And I love that. Watch and wait is better than engage and enrage. Because sometimes silence truly is golden, and sometimes the best response is no response, rather than getting ourselves sucked into whatever it is that we feel passionate about, but isn't ours to do. anytime you're in a place where you are in the mindset of we are right, think of those acronyms. We are right, WAR. It means that we are in a mindset of war. And so do what you can to notice when you are being sucked in, and choose instead to engage, to not engage, and instead be silent, to watch and wait. And sometimes that means not doing anything. You know, Jesus at his trial was asked if he was the King of the Jews. And he could have had a discussion, he could have asserted something, he could have defended himself, he could probably have said something that would have gotten him out of that situation. And instead, what he said was, "You say that I am." And the wisdom of that is profound for me. The idea that just because somebody else challenges us does not mean that we have to engage. Sometimes silence is truly golden. Decide who you want to be in this situation, whatever it is. Am I walking in as the presence of peace? Am I walking in as the presence of wisdom? Do I bring this to the table? Or am I bringing my own fear and anxiety and adding it to the system? Watch and wait. Attend to your own anxiety. And then accept that there will be differences. You know, it's kind of strange how we assume that everyone is going to see things from our point of view. And I find it so instructive that just as we have 7 point whatever billion unique fingerprints on the planet, we have 7+ billion unique iris prints on the planet. Your eye print is as unique as your fingerprint. And yet somehow we think that everyone should see things exactly the way we see them. And I encourage you to think about the idea of a point of view is a view from a point. And there are over 7 billion points on the planet. Think of your closest family, people who you would think would see things exactly the same way you did. They grew up in the same, under the same roof, perhaps with the same parents, and how different we all are. How sane is it to actually expect that everyone will see things our way? It's fantasy. And so think of a bottle of ketchup. If I were to ask you and hold up a bottle of ketchup and describe it, what you would see and describe back to me would be completely different from what I'm seeing. And it's the same bottle of ketchup. So recognize that there will be differences. And then acknowledge that our ability to change another person's behavior is not only undesirable, it is also unlikely. And so the question that we want to answer for ourselves is, what is more empowering for me? What fulfills my mission more? What is wisdom for me? What does the quality of the relationship that I want to build with this person look like? And when we get to that point, we realize that coercion, the idea of pushing someone into a direction because we think it's correct for them doesn't work. It doesn't work for them, just as when other people do it for us, it doesn't work for us. And do we want people to tiptoe around us? Do we want them to avoid saying things to us because they know that we're going to react in a way that's just going to make them feel worse if they're having a rotten time? The 4 words in the English language that I think we should add, you know how we've got a few that we want to remove from the English language in the way we speak, one of them being should and the other being never. Well, the other 4 words that I think of is, I told you so. Doesn't create a place of emotional safety. Accept that there will be differences. And if we want people to come to us because we are safe, then we don't want to do anything that creates anxiety, nervousness, resentment, fear of reaction when people come to us. We don't want it for ourselves, and we certainly wouldn't want it for others. And then allow, number 3, allow for imperfection. You don't have to like what they're doing. You don't have to agree with what they're doing. You don't even have to be best friends. And maybe, just maybe, you've done something similar at some point in your life. Or maybe you've thought something similar at some point in your life. Or maybe you've believed something similar at some point in your life. Or maybe you've been late, or you've overreacted, or you've said something that came out completely incorrectly and someone else has taken offense. There's something called the gift of the turnaround. And what that does is allow us to look in the mirror and go, yeah, I've done something similar at some point in my life. And simply saying that will help to release some of the energy that you might have built around what you're hoping for this person or this institution to do. We are more than 2-dimensional beings. And sometimes we do things beautifully, and sometimes we kind of mess up. And what I believed when I was 18 is quite different from what I believed when I was 28, and quite different from what I believe now. And perhaps that is true for other people as well. Jesus calls this turning the other cheek, a willingness to look at it differently, allowing for something not to be perfect, and not, again, allowing it to escalate. Well, you may say, yeah, but, and here is the D. I said 3 A's and a D. Here is the D. The D is that there are times, and you may never have heard this in a church before, or a spiritual community before, where we are told to love one another, love one another, love one another. Yes. And there will be times potentially in your life where what your circle of values doesn't interact with another circle of values. It's like those magician rings, if actually magically need to come apart. And I actually think that that is wisdom too, to know that if something isn't working and it's not going to work, then to honor each person's values, it is wiser to disengage. And by disengaging this way in wisdom, we actually still maintain a tiny little tenuous connection with them, which is now just an emotional connection. And the way we do that is to disengage with dignity, both for ourselves and for others. When I was a little girl, I was taught, and I'm sure this is true for many people, especially women who are on this call, that you had to put up, that you had to be nice, that you had to give in, that you had to go along to get along, and so on. And part of differentiation is recognizing that that may not always be necessary. In fact, most of the time it's not necessary and people will adjust. Once in a while, that splitting apart means truly splitting apart. Disengaging from the workplace, from the marriage, from the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, from sometimes parents or the religious organization. So the goal at this point is to make that thread of connection a thread that is not interconnected in any way, and to do it with dignity. We would not want to be the originator of pressure or threats or force. Neither do we deserve to be pressured or threatened or forced. And so a reasonable response sometimes is to disengage with dignity. And so this true connection that we seek, this circle of connection, this circles of connection, because we are not just in one circle, we're in hundreds of circles. This true connection comes and starts with ourselves, where we accept and allow ourselves first to be who we are. And then when we accept and allow others to be who they are, separate individuals, the face of God just as we are. And the way we do that is to attend to our own anxiety and notice where we are trying to escalate. Let us accept differences. Let us recognize that we are a view from a point, and others also have a point of view. And then let us allow for imperfection. Allow others to make mistakes and welcome their coming to us in safety, in emotional safety. And finally, if necessary, if we do need to make that connection like razor thin and disengage, let us do so with dignity, honoring ourselves and the godness of the other, even as we do so. We are all part of circles of connection. Let us remember to be separate and together. Let's take this into a time of meditation. As we Take a breath and consider this image of magician's rings as we consider ourselves as one whole and the other people in our lives, the multiple circles that we know. And we ask ourselves questions. Where am I? Infringing on someone else's circle? Where am I forcing myself and eclipsing their uniqueness? Where am I escalating? Where can I accept differences? Where am I able to create more emotional safety for the people I care about? And where in my life am I playing too small? Where in my life am I longing to shine and feeling the pressure of someone else's wishes? Is there a place in my life where I can lovingly ask someone to move over a little bit so that my light can shine? As I leave today and move forward and begin again after this service, let me resolve to imagine carrying these magic circles with me so that I can remember to allow every person to have their own circle, even as I have mine. In the silence, build that picture. And we begin again. Amen.